And especially for men, because women tend not to do the same dumb investing things that men do.
They're much smarter at this. Yeah.
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 But like, imagine having to go to your spouse and say, like, hey, like, bad news. We thought we were going to retire at 60. Now we need to retire at 65.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike.
And I'm Andrew.
And we're the Midlife Guys. So today is our third episode on the topic of financial well-being for midlifers. This is an incredibly important topic given the state of things right now. And so we are so thankful for everyone who's sent us messages about the episodes that have aired so far. Today, we're going to focus on retirement. There are many milestones in life: marriage, having kids, raising a family. But one of the biggest milestones that midlifers are thinking about is their retirement.
I'm here
that
for
magic
it.
moment. Oh, that magic moment when you can finally leave your job behind and settle into a post-work reality. However, more and more midlifers are concerned about the prospect of their retirement. According to the U.S. Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, over half of American households, 54% to be exact, don't have any retirement savings at all. And in the 2026 Planning and Progress Study by Northwestern Mutual, Americans now say that the magic number that they need to hit in order to retire comfortably is $1.46 million. So let's couple that with the reality from that Federal Reserve study. The average retirement account balances, 401ks and IRAs, are as follows. And this is from 2023. The Federal Reserve is launching a new survey right now, but we won't see those numbers for a while. All right. 35 to 39, average account balances is 73,200. 40 to 44, 109,000. 45 to 49, 152,000. 50 to 54, 199,000. 55 to 59, 244,000. Of course, these numbers will grow over time as each group nears retirement, but they're nowhere near that magic number that most Americans feel they need to retire comfortably. So to help us talk about this topic, we are joined by Dan Honsberger, who is a certified financial planner and founder of Real Financial Planning. Dan has over 20 years of experience in the financial services industry and specializes in working with individuals on wealth management, retirement planning, tax planning, and other matters. So thank you for joining us, Dan.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mike.
Importantly,
I'm happy to talk with you and Andrew.
and Dan is also a midlifer, so he fits the mold of our show. So yeah, thanks for being here, Dan. I think this will
You
be
can
a
tell
good
from the
topic.
gray in my beard.
And in my hair.
It happens to all of us. It happens to all of us. It's all right. All right. So let's start off the conversation with the numbers I mentioned above. Americans are saving, but they're not saving enough for retirement. So what should midlifers be thinking about right now as it relates to 401ks, IRAs, and Roth IRAs?
Well, thanks again, Mike and Andrew, for having me talk about an important topic that impacts all of us. You know, most of us don't think that we want to be working, you know, when we're 75 and 85 and hopefully beyond that. I have a lot of prospective clients come to me who I think embody the anxiety that some of these stats that you're talking about portray. You know, basically, who feel like they're behind or they're not sure if they're behind. And what's kind of interesting is that there are a lot of different comparison points out there, you know, to figure out or to think about whether or not you're on track. You know, whether it's public figures, especially on social media, family, friends, neighbors, and really none of those are good comparisons because those people aren't living the lives that we're living. So usually the first step when I'm talking through retirement and just kind of where clients feel like they're at is to help them figure out their own comparison point. So for each of us individually, that means thinking about what's important to us, what do we value, and what do we want to work to look like over time. Do we want to fully retire at that magic age that you're talking about, Mike, and retire on a beach, or maybe maybe more like me, work is important to important structure for some people. But maybe we want to make work optional at a certain age so that we can have financial independence to do what we want with our time. I heard somebody say recently that families spend more time planning their annual family vacation than they do planning or strategizing about retirement. Um,
I mean, that could
so,
be
and
right. Yeah. We just did a whole series on travel too, I feel like, because
yeah,
we were kind of like talked about travel first. Maybe we should have started with retirement.
so yeah, if you're
Yeah.
taking the time out to think and plan about your retirement, even though maybe you feel like you're behind, I think that's a really good first step, is just kind of figuring out your comparison point. And then once you've kind of done that, once we figured out what your dream is, then really we measure if your current savings and your investment habits and all of your different financial habits will kind of let you fully realize the dream on the timeline that you've laid out. If not, basically there's no better time than now to start making adjustments to the things that are kind of within our control, whether we're in midlife or early in career or close to retirement. And primarily that means figuring out how much you save and making changes to that, or how long you work. Um, so when I have people come to me and they feel like they're behind, that tends to mean that they feel like they haven't built a good savings habit. And that's really the number one thing that midlifers can do to give themselves flexibility down the road, is to and some options for retirement, is to keep working on and building up that savings habit.
Do you have any tips, Dan, about maybe some ways to build that savings habit? I think that's definitely a good idea. And I know something that Mike and I have talked a little bit about in previous episodes, just sort of like the behavioral change or trying to give yourself goals and try to figure out how do you be consistent with something. So
Yeah,
I don't know if you have like one or two really common tips to help midlifers in particular with kind of getting on that savings train.
I think it's one is to just start small.
Mm,
If you haven't saved anything, you know, just start doing something to build the habit. And whether that's in your employer retirement plan, where hopefully you can get a match on some money, and which can actually double the contribution that you're making. Or I've been working on more recently with clients who are, they want to like really dive in on their spending and make some
mm,
cuts there so they can save elsewhere. And so if you can identify, I don't, $300 or $400 a month that you're spending on subscriptions, streaming services, whatever, that if you can cut that out, and then you can immediately set things up and automate your savings in a way so that savings goes directly to an investment account. That's a way to save without impacting the rest of your kind of monthly budget. So couple ideas there. Another one that I think is really good is, as you get, hopefully you get increases in your salary or the hourly rate that you're getting paid. Let's say it's 3% per year that you're getting bumped up in pay. Take 1 or 2 or 3% and increase your contribution to your employer retirement
yeah, yeah.
account,
Hmm.
because then you know you're you're still living on the same net pay that you have been, and at the same time you're contributing more to your retirement account. So
It's a good
I'm going to
idea. Yeah.
preempt you a little bit, Andrew, and um, say that there's the saying, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the
Right.
next best time is today. And that's really true when you think about the power of compounding,
Yeah.
which is staggering, um, over a long career and a long lifespan. So the sooner you can do it, the better. But just the fact that you didn't do it when you were 20 and now you're 40, that doesn't mean that you can't still get a lot out of saving and having that money accumulate.
Right. And hopefully you still got lots of years ahead of you, right? That's the goal. That
Yep.
we'll all be doing
Yep.
this for a little bit longer. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit about, you know, the progress towards retirement and essentially like um, ways in which you can or ways in which you should increase your savings rate as you get closer to retirement? Do you have any advice on how people should be thinking about that?
Yep. Yeah. So typically over time, we're earning more in our careers, and your highest kind of wage years tend to be the 10 to 15 to 20 years prior to retirement. If you're lucky enough to be in a place where maybe you've gotten into an executive position and you're getting some stock from your company or some level of ownership, that's a way to really boost and juice your retirement savings. But even if you haven't been, and assuming that you're learning and growing in your career, well, I guess that's even just something to think about. That if you can invest in yourself, grow your career, grow your earnings capacity, that's going to let you save more. Um, as you make more money, and hopefully you're not increasing your lifestyle to the same extent that you're increasing your earnings.
Right.
But yeah, it's that as you make more money over time, your capacity to save should also go up. And if you are intentional about saving in the same way that we're intentional about planning our family vacations, which I'm also very passionate about, um, then you're carving out a good chunk that's going to go to make sure that you in the future also gets to do the fun things that you can do right now.
Yeah,
Now,
it's a unique situation for us because since Andrew and I are business owners, we are able to participate in profit sharing contributions for our 401k plan. But
Mm.
I know a
that
lot of
helps. Yeah.
folks, a lot of midlifers aren't that fortunate. So
Yep. Yeah, and if you don't have an employer retirement account, there are other options for you. You probably have heard of an IRA or a Roth IRA.
Mhm.
These are retirement accounts that are just not associated with your employer. And it gives you a way to kind of save in a tax efficient manner. So in a traditional IRA, the money that you put in a lot of times can be deducted from your current income, so you're not paying tax on that money now, and then it grows tax deferred, and then you only pay tax when you take the money out in retirement. But it lets you let that money grow and compound, um, without kind of having to take away tax along the way, which is super helpful. And then on the flip side, with the Roth IRA, you're not getting a tax deduction up front, but it grows tax free and you can use it tax free in retirement. So, you know, you don't get any lower than tax free as far as the tax rate goes. So I love Roth IRAs as an option, which even if you have an employer retirement plan like a 401k or a 403b, a lot of times you're still able to take advantage of some of these, an IRA or a Roth IRA, kind of depending on your situation. If you've got capacity to save above and beyond the limits in your employer plan.
Dan, you've talked a lot about different savings or kind of, I guess, investment accounts or ways to try to save for retirement. And it kind of always makes me think um, about like the fees associated with some of those things too, and how to
Hmm.
evaluate that. That's something that I look at when I think about, okay, my retirement, my 401k money is going to go into like this mutual fund or ETF or whatnot, or this group
Hmm.
of whatever it might be. If we're talking about like those type of savings or investment accounts, how do you look at different types of fees? I mean, should we be putting as much money as possible into like a low cost ETF, or do you get what you pay for? Maybe that's not always the best
Yep.
option. I'm sort of curious because I do take a close look at that and I'm kind of cognizant about how those fees can add up over time.
Yep. Yeah. So my investment philosophy, and I feel like it's proven out by a lot of research, is that you start simple. You
Hmm.
start with low fee investments. So that can be exchange traded funds or mutual funds, which tend to kind of track an index. Like you may have heard
Right.
of the S&P 500, which
Hmm.
which roughly tracks the 500 biggest publicly traded companies in the U.S., or like the total U.S. stock index or the total world stock index or the total bond index.
Yeah.
Typically, these are a good building block for folks' retirement and investment. Um, you may, so in an employer plan, your employer typically limits the investment options. They tell you what
Right.
10 or 15 or 20 funds are in there that you can invest in. And typically, I think you're on the right track, Andrew. The kind of the lowest cost, broadest index funds tend to be a really good building block. There's an incredible amount of research that shows that these fees that you're talking about, the kind of the jargon for them is expense ratio. So a mutual fund is going to charge, I don't know, for an index fund, maybe it's 0.1% per year or lower than that. You can also find funds that charge 1% per year or 1.5% per year. And it's a little bit insidious because these fees are a little insidious because you never see on your account statement where they're taking you 1% of the balance of your investment.
Mm-hmm.
It just happens. It's built into the price of these investments. So effectively, they're reducing the return of your investments. And the difference between paying 1% and 0.1%, that extra 0.9%,
Yeah.
multiplied over 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it has a really big impact.
Yeah.
And research has shown that that having low fees is really important as a way to kind of capture as much returns as you can. And if we're talking about controlling things that you can control with your retirement, savings is important. How long you work is important, and also investing in the right way. Meaning in a
Makes
kind of a
sense.
low cost way is another way that you can really help yourself out.
Cool. That's great advice.
Cool.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. You've
Sure.
provided a great overview of what midlifers should be thinking about as it relates to 401ks, IRAs, and Roth IRAs. But I'd love for you to kind of dive in, and you just touched upon this a little bit more about alternative ways to
Hmm.
plan for retirement. So, like insurance, estate planning, real estate. How do all of
Hmm.
these alternative items fit into the
Yeah.
retirement mix?
Yeah. So first, I'm going to give you so if my number one rule of retirement planning is to save as much as you can as soon as you can, my second rule is don't do anything to screw up all of the good work that you've done. And a little story here to kind of illustrate my point. I used to work with a guy who was really successful, had like made more than $1 million a year, had accumulated more than enough money to retire comfortably on his timeline. But at some point, he started to dabble in some like cutting edge cryptocurrency derivative
Uh,
speculation. And like really early on, I would get calls where he was like, wow, I tripled my investment in just like 3 weeks. And along the way, every time we talked about it, I was like, do you really understand what you're doing? Are you really sure that you know? And is this real, basically? And unfortunately, it ended up not being real and set him
oh,
back like millions of dollars. It was a scam. He lost the entire investment.
wow.
And not only was the money gone, but to translate this into kind of retirement terms, he had to come to terms with like working an extra 5 to 10 years beyond what he was planning to because he had gotten involved in something that was shiny and bright and, thought that he could take himself from being rich to like ultra rich. But it ended up really, I mean, it just worked out terribly. Um, and most of us don't get another bite at the apple. Whether
Yeah.
you accumulate your savings over a long career, or you inherit some money, or maybe you're a business owner that sells and gives you a little bit of a windfall. Um, Usually these things don't happen twice, or they're really hard to
Right.
replicate.
Yeah.
So if you mess something up, it can really dramatically impact the rest of your life. Um, and my observation from years of working with clients and helping them through money, um, different situations, is that the best way to make money is to do things that you know how to do and that you're skilled at and that you're competent at. and that it's usually not a good idea to put your retirement money at risk for some venture that you're coming into anew. So basically, don't learn how to do things using your retirement money. So Mike, you mentioned that alternative investments. There are seemingly like an endless amount of different things that you can invest in. We've talked about like employer retirement plans and IRAs and brokerage accounts where you can invest in publicly traded stocks and mutual funds and exchange traded funds and bonds. This, for me, I think should be the building blocks of most people's wealth building, maybe with the exception of folks who own a business who have a lot of kind of enterprise value tied up in the value of their business. Once you kind of get beyond that, I think it's okay to supplement with additional alternative investments. This could mean real estate partnerships where you're, either becoming a partner in the development of some sort of commercial or residential property, or cryptocurrency if you kind of understand how that works, or investing in private equity companies, which you can't escape hearing the phrase private equity these days, or hedge funds. There's a lot of different things that you can do, but the building block for most people should be these low cost investments that are diversified, that just don't have some of the risks that some of these other additional alternative investments can have. And I can't help but think about, when we talk about real estate in particular, I think about like 2006, 2007, when I was watching a lot of like home flipping TV shows.
Yeah.
And it seemed really easy, and it seemed like a no-brainer way of making money. But I think there's a lot of people that lost their shirts when home prices came down, or just even didn't know how to, renovate, how to buy at a good deal, how to renovate and sell. So, so having a core competency, making money at what you're really good at, doing things in a really basic way and having good building blocks for kind of low cost, and diversified investments like we're talking about, and then kind of getting into some of the alternative investments, as long as you really understand what you're getting and what the fees are and all that sort of thing.
Would it be fair to say, Dan, too, that when you think about maybe what you have those building blocks, that foundation, right? Then maybe it's like you leave that alone, keep putting money in there. And then as you grow in your career or whatever, and you get some extra money, it's like the extra money that you have, you maybe look at these alternative things, right? You don't necessarily mess with the foundation. You leave that strong where it is. And it's like you've got some extra money to play with. Then you maybe think about some of this other stuff. Is that fair?
I think that's a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
I don't gamble a lot, but this
Right.
is what you call like gambling with the house's money, right?
Yeah.
You've won something, you pull out your original investment, and now you're just gambling with the gains, right? I think that's the right way to think about it, because like I said, if you mess something up, you don't
Right.
want to, like, especially if you're married, and especially for men, because women tend not to do the same dumb investing things that men do.
They're much smarter at this. Yeah.
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 But like, imagine having to go to your spouse and say, like, hey, like, bad news. We thought we were going to retire at 60. Now we need to retire at 65 because I did something.
Yeah.
No one wants to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
I also hear you that crypto is a scam, I think, but I'll leave that for another another topic. I don't get cryptocurrency.
You'll get a lot of comments based on
I'm
that.
sure I will. We will. I don't care. I just know it's
Based on
never
that take.
explained it to me as to how it actually works, like in a good, effective way. But that's a separate.
That's a good example of
separate
something that I
topic.
don't really understand very
Yeah,
well.
I
And
don't
because of
either.
that, I haven't gotten real involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I don't, I probably could do more, but I don't. Having the mix of like the universal life insurance, I think is a great way to build up wealth, tax deferred or pass, as well as real estate.
Yeah.
Investing in the real estate, lots of opportunities there.
Well,
So.
that's something too that if we're talking about passive income streams, like you probably can tell us better than a lot of people, like real estate is not passive, right? Like
Yeah.
your investment in whether it's in the US or outside, you do a lot of work
Yeah,
to
Mhm.
make that work financially,
that's
right?
true.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. And then other I'm I maybe have a little different take on the insurance piece. It can work in some situations to have some tax deferred growth, like what you're saying. For the most part, I think you use insurance to insure against risk and kind of keep it separate from investing. But again, there are some different situations where that can make sense. So if you, like I said, if you kind of start from the foundation of you know uh, investing in a diversified way, in a, I don't know, maybe you could call it a boring way, low
yeah.
cost. Like no one really gets excited about low cost index funds, but that's okay because you
Right.
want that over time to grow and accumulate. And there's nothing more passive than putting money into your employer 401k or your
Yeah.
brokerage account and just letting it grow over a long period of time.
Mhm. So the final thing I want to discuss are uh, advantage of tax advantage savings
Hmm.
tools that are out there, whether it be health savings accounts, flexible spending accounts, 529 plans. So how can midlifers take advantage of these plans to prepare themselves and their families for the future?
Yeah, so if retirement is a big, huge conversation, like taxes are probably like equally as big of a conversation, and we could spend hours talking about it. And sometimes I get the sense that people think taxes are kind of like an inevitable thing that happened to us and we can't really do anything about. And to a certain extent, that's true. Like we have to pay property taxes for a house
Yeah.
and our cars and boats sometimes, which is a little irritating. And then also on our income, we have to pay taxes on the money that we earn. But every dollar we pay in taxes is another dollar we can't spend on something that we actually want to spend money on. And there are actually ways that we can kind of reduce our tax bill both now and in retirement. So if kind of building a savings habit is like retirement 101, and investing in a diversified and low cost way is retirement 201. I think investing in a tax efficient way is maybe 301
Mm.
retirement. Um, and there are a couple of big buckets of investment accounts as they relate to taxes. You've got pre tax accounts like your employer retirement account, whether it's a 401k or a 457 or a 403b, um, and also traditional IRA falls into that, where the money that you put in, your contributions typically don't count towards your federal taxable income in that year. So you're like reducing your taxes now when you contribute to these accounts, but you pay tax on every dollar that you withdraw in retirement. So no tax now, but you get tax later.
Yeah.
I really like Roth accounts, which are another type of tax, like a tax wrapper on investment accounts. So you can actually have a Roth 401k or a Roth 403b, and you can self-direct a Roth IRA. And again, you don't reduce your taxes now with these type of accounts when you contribute to them, but they grow tax-free and you can use them tax-free in retirement. So if you put $10,000 in a Roth IRA and over a 40-year career, if you can grow at 10%, that's like, I have the number here. That's like $730,000 almost that
Oh
you're
wow.
10% just accumulating at 10% per
Yeah.
year and compounding. That's $10,000 you didn't pay tax on today. That turns into $700,000 or more in retirement that you don't have to pay tax on when you withdraw from. So I love Roth accounts where you can fit them in. And then uh, we haven't really talked about like a taxable account, which is just kind of a regular brokerage account, which these are taxed the same way that your savings accounts are. When you have investment activity in these types of accounts, like interests or dividends or capital gains, in the year that you have that activity, that counts as income that you're then taxed on. So typically, like when we're talking about filling up the different kind of taxable tax type account buckets, typically we're talking about filling up your Roth, as much as you can,
Yeah.
and then filling up your pre-tax or employer retirement accounts, and then what you've got left over, which is kind of what you talked about, Andrew. Like maybe you've maxed out all these other types of accounts and you've got some extra money to invest. You can invest in a taxable brokerage account. You can put it in a savings account. You can invest it in real estate or something else. You just don't get the same kinds of tax breaks
Right.
with that kind of account that you do with an IRA or Roth IRA or 401k or Roth 401k. So that's kind of like retirement accounts, like thinking about saving for the long term. I mean, there are like my arm is only so long, but there's probably a longer list of different types of accounts than my arm is long. And so a lot of these kind of kick in with at the employer benefits level. So your employer may offer you health insurance where you could qualify for what's called a health savings account, an HSA, where if you qualify to contribute to this, it's like a special investment account that's set aside just for health expenses, medical expenses. And an HSA is maybe the best tax efficient account that you can contribute to because you get a tax deduction when you contribute. Your money, you can invest money in an HSA and it grows tax free. And then you can, if you spend it on health, on medical expenses, and there's a pretty broad array of what's considered a qualifying healthcare expense, you can take the money out tax free. So it's a way to, and you can even do this and invest for years down the road and use this like when you're in retirement. And so if you can kind of build up an HSA balance over a long time, and most people tend to have higher healthcare costs later in life. It's a really good way to save money for that specific purpose so that you don't have to use your like fund money for it. You've also got things like flexible spending accounts, which are kind of more like a use it or lose it type account. A lot of times that are offered through the employer, where you're more like prepaying for medical expenses or dependent care expenses. There are a couple different types of FSAs. You're getting a tax deduction for that, for your contributions, but then you can pay for after-tax expenses with these types of accounts. And then you've got 529s, which are not necessarily retirement accounts, but they're a special savings vehicle for education expenses that help you save and invest and kind of compound your money. That can be used for college, trade school, and now even K-12 tuition and fees. So a lot of
I just
different
learned
things that
that
you can
about the
do out there.
K-12. That's fascinating. I didn't know that about 529s can now be K-12.
Yeah.
We just found that out. I was like, "Oh, that's
Yep.
interesting too." I think a lot of parents are probably familiar with the 529 for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The one I
Yep.
think interesting takeaway I had from we talked about, Dan, is interesting that a lot of this is through your employer. So it makes me think that, as midlifers, now's a good time that, where we are in our careers to start asking about some of these plans more, or go to your employer and say like, hey, what do I have access to?
Yep.
What type of options do you have? Explain to me, because there might be a lot that we're missing that we don't even know we have access to that we can kind of use to be as tax efficient as possible. Because I don't know about you guys, but I want to pay as little in taxes as I am legally allowed to do. Whatever that smallest number is, that's what I'm aiming for.
Yep. Yeah. In my
Yeah.
college courses, the professors used to say, tax avoidance is okay, tax evasion is not okay.
Fair, yes. It is.
That's
That
illegal.
is fair.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Get in trouble for that.
Yeah.
So this has been a great conversation. So
Yeah.
thank you, Dan, for being here and for sharing your expertise with our listeners and viewers. We have blown through our time for today. So if you've not done so already, please like and subscribe. It doesn't cost you a thing, but it helps us a lot. Remember, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartMedia, and all your favorite podcasting platforms. And until next week, good luck, guys.
See ya.